Good morning. Today we are doing our last lesson of Chapter 10, which is 10.7. It's called Interpret the Discriminant. Now, the discriminant is a big fancy word for the part of the quadratic formula. So this, remember, was the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of, and then, oops, not 4, b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So the part we're looking at today, the discriminant, is only part of this quadratic function. It's everything underneath that square root symbol. So everything underneath the square root is what we call the discriminant. So the value of it, when you solve it, simplify it, the value of the discriminant can be used to determine the number of solutions, the number of x-intercepts, the zeros, the roots. These all mean the same thing. It's figuring out how many times does it cross the x-axis. Does it touch only at 1 point? Does it touch at 2 points? Or does it not touch the x-axis at all? That will tell you how many x-intercepts there are, how many zeros there are. Why do they call it a zero? Because it's when y is at 0. Or how many roots, like we solved using square roots before to figure out how many times does it cross the x-axis. So what we're going to do today is to figure out what is the value. Is b squared minus 4ac, everything that's underneath the square root there, is it greater than 0? Like 4. You can take, for example, the square root of 4. We can do that. We have a plus 2 and a minus 2, so there are two solutions. If we take the square root and it's equal to 0, well, I know there's not a square root on here, but if we were to take the square root of 0, that's only one answer, 0. There's no plus 0 and minus 0. There's just one answer, 0. It's going to cross one time. So two solutions if it's positive, one solution if it's 0. If b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, meaning it's a negative number, can you take the square root of a negative number? No, you cannot. That's why there is no solution. Your calculator will tell you error. So again, why? Because the square root of b squared minus 4a cannot be negative. It can be positive or it can be 0, but if it's negative, that means there's no solution. So there is a song here. I will post the link to this song in Schoology as well. So let's take a look here first. We are going to use our equation to help us figure out and solve the discriminant, and then figure out how many solutions are there total. So right away I'm going to label this is A, this is B, and this is C. If it helps to circle, A is 2, B is 6, and C is 5, go ahead and do so. So then we're going to simplify here. B squared, so B is 6, so 6 squared, minus 4 times A times C. Well, A is 2, and C is 5. So if we simplify this, 6 times 6 is 36. And reminder, we're solving using our order of operations. Some of you forget that sometimes. We do our exponent first, then multiply and divide, then add and subtract. So we can't do our adding and subtracting yet. We have to do our multiplying. So we have 36 minus 4 times 2, which is 8. But 8 times 5 is really 40. So all of those numbers multiplied really give us 40. So 36 minus 40 is going to give us a negative 4. Can we take the square root of a negative 4? No, you cannot. So there is no solution. Next, be careful on this one. It says our equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. We have the x squared, we have ax squared. We don't have bx in the middle. So when we go to label A, B, and C, A is a 1. B, there is no term with just an x in it, so there's no b term, 0. And C is a negative 7. Be careful, that whole piece goes with C. So let's plug this in. We have b squared, plugging it into our discriminant, b squared, which is 0 squared, minus 4 times a times c, A is 1, and C is negative 7. Now, don't just stop because you see a 0. I know 0 squared is 0, but here we have negative 4 times 1, which is really just negative 4, and negative 4 times negative 7 makes a positive 28. If you thought of this as 4 times 1 is 4, times negative 7 is negative 28, that is also correct, but you have that negative sign, so the two negatives will make a positive. So you still have a positive 28, which you can take the square root of. So if we were to plug that in our calculator, we would have two answers, a positive and a negative. So this has two solutions. And then last, again, A, B, and C. A is out front, B is a negative 12, be careful, and C is 9. So if we evaluate or simplify our discriminant, we have B squared, or negative 12 squared. Don't forget it's negative 12 two times, not just 12, minus 4 times A times C. Well, A is 4, and C is 9. And so negative 12 times negative 12 makes a positive 144. And then over here, we have minus 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 9. 16 times 9, I'm going to plug that in my calculator. 16 times 9 gives us 144. And there was only the one negative, so this is still negative here. So 144 minus 144 is 0. We can take the square root of 0. It's just 0. That's only one answer there. So there is one solution. Alright, we're going to do the same thing here, but less structure. These next ones aren't going to always be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, so we need to do so. Doesn't matter which side you move things to. It's up to you. If you want to move these two to the right, because there's only two terms to move, you can. If you want to move these to the left, so everything's positive, you can do that. I'm going to move it to the left because I like positive numbers. And I'm going to move this all at the same time. I'm also going to add 4x. And I'm also going to subtract 8. So all of this side eliminates. I'm going to move this over so I have room to write here. I have 8x squared minus 4x squared. 8 minus 4 is 4. There's only one term with an x here, so plus 4x. And then 9 minus 8 gives me 1. So A is 4, B is 4, and C is 1. So first, we need to figure out how many solutions are there by evaluating our discriminant. B squared minus 4AC. So B is 4, so we have 4 squared minus 4 times A times C. A is also a 4, and C is 1. So simplifying here, 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16. Doing our multiplying first, order of operations, 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 1 is still 16, and we're subtracting. So we get 0. If we wanted to, if this was a quadratic formula, remember I wrote out the quadratic formula? This is really under the square root. So we can plug this in. It technically would be 0, which is just one solution. Even though it's 0, that is one spot where our graph would cross the x-axis. So this next one is already equal to 0, so I know A is 2, B is negative 5, and C is 6. If it helps to circle so you know it's a negative there, this is a positive, this is a positive, do that. So again, B squared minus 4AC. B is negative 5, so I have negative 5 squared minus 4 times A times C. A is 2 and C is 6. So simplifying, negative 5 times negative 5 is a positive 25. Minus 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 6, or 6 times 8, is 48. So if we simplify, some of you can already tell there's more negative numbers, so this is going to be a negative. And you can't take the square root of a negative number, so we can already jump over here and say that there is no solution, because you can't take the square root of a negative number. If you tried, you'd get a negative, I believe, 23, and your calculator would tell you there's no solution there. Alright, I want you to try this last one here, like this, on your own, and then click play to see if you got it right. The one thing on this one that you need to be careful of is that it's not equal to 0. You need to move this 1 over before you start solving. So we have negative x squared plus 2x minus 1. If you want to put a 1 there, you can. That's a, negative 1, b is 2, and c is negative 1. So we have b squared minus 4ac, so b is 2 squared. A is negative 1, and C is also negative 1. So 2 squared is 4. Then negative 4 times negative 1 makes a positive 4. So those make a positive 4, but 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. So 4 minus 4 is 0. For some of you, if this part is confusing, just think of this all as multiplication. Negative 4 times negative 1 times negative 1, and then just put whatever answer you got. You got 4, and it's negative. Negative is just in front. 4 minus 4 is 0. You can take the square root of 0. It's just 0. That's one answer. So we have one solution. All right. This next one is taking this one step further. It says, tell whether the vertex of the graph of the function lies above, below, or on the x-axis. Explain your reasoning. So we're going to follow the same steps that we did before, and then last we're just going to tell where is the point that we're figuring out. So before we start this, if we go back for a second, what we did just back here, we were told, or we know that this equation back up here had one solution. That means it was crossing at one point. You also knew that this equation, a is a positive number, so it's opening up. So we knew that if it's touching at one spot, it has to be the vertex, so we would say this one is on the x-axis. This one also opens up, and there is no solution. So somewhere up here, I don't know where, but somewhere there is no solution. So we would say this vertex would have to be above the x-axis. Make sense? So let's take a look at these ones. First, these are in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So just identify a, b, and c. Whoa, didn't mean to do that. A first. There's no number there, it's a 1. B is a negative 9. And c, there's nothing there, it would be 0. So if we interpret the discriminant first, b squared minus 4ac, we'll figure out how many spots this graph touches the x-axis. So we have b squared, so negative 9 squared minus 4 times a times c. A is 1 and c is 0. So negative 9 times negative 9, 9 times 9 is 81. Minus 4 times 1 is 4, times 0 is just 0. So we have a positive answer, so that means that we have two solutions, because if we take the square root of that, we'll get a positive number or a negative number. So we have two solutions. I'm going to just draw a tiny sketch here of this graph. A is a positive number 1, so I know my graph is going to open up. So if it's opening up and it's crossing two spots, it's got to touch somewhere. So now that we figured out this parabola crosses the x-axis in two spots, it said, tell whether the vertex of the graph is above, below, or on the x-axis. So if it's crossing in two spots and it's opening up, the vertex down here has to be below the x-axis. All right, let's go on to the middle one, identifying A, B, and C first. A out front, there's no number, so it's just 1x squared. B is in the middle, 10, and C is 25. So let's interpret the discriminant underneath our square root. So first, b squared, b is 10, so we have 10 squared, minus 4 times a times c. A is 1, and c is 25. So simplifying 10 squared is just 100, 10 times 10, minus 4 times 1, which is just 4. 4 times 25 is 100. So we have 100 minus 100, which is now just 0. We can take the square root of 0. Square root of 0 is just 0. So there is one solution, because that's one answer. So if I sketch a tiny graph here, it's going to cross my x-axis at one spot. I don't know where it is. Just put a dot somewhere. And a was a positive number, so I know this is going to open up. And it asks, where is the vertex? So if it's crossing at one spot, that one spot is the vertex, so it is on the x-axis. All right, last one on this slide. I would like for you to try this one on your own, and then turn and talk with a neighbor, or click play to see if you got it right. So first, A out front is a 1. There's a negative there, so it's a negative 1. B is 2, and C is negative 4. So interpreting our discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, b is 2, so we have 2 squared, minus 4 times a times c. A, don't forget it's negative, it's a negative 1, and c is also negative, negative 4. So following our order of operations, 2 squared with the exponent first is 4. Then negative 4 times negative 1 is a positive 4. Positive 4 times negative 4 is negative 16. Well, 4 take away 16, you don't really even need to know what the answer is because there's more negatives. It would be a negative 12, which you cannot take the square root of. So this one would be no solution. You do still need to answer the question though. Where's the vertex? If it's no solution, that just means it's not touching the x-axis. This graph was a negative. It's opening down then. Our vertex is below the x-axis because it's opening down and it's not touching the x-axis. All right, last question. This one goes back to something that we learned a while back, so I'll put the formula up here in a second. It says you and your friend are walking around the exterior, the outside, of a tennis court that has a 12-foot high fence around it. You pick up a ball and try and throw it from a height of 5 feet over the fence, meaning you're standing here and your arm is 5 feet above the ground. Okay? You're going to try and throw it over the fence. Hopefully it goes over and comes down on the other side. You throw it with an initial vertical velocity of 20 feet per second. Did the ball make it over the fence? So we need to see, does the ball make it over or does it hit the fence and fall to the ground? So there are a couple different options here. First, we're going to use our equation for objects, throwing objects, which is our height equals negative 16t squared, remember t is our time, plus vt plus s. A couple things here. V, remember, is our velocity. S is our starting height. And h is our ending height. We are trying to find t. If we can find t, the time it takes to throw it over the fence, that means it will have landed on the other side. So a couple things we know. We want it to end on the ground on the other side, so our ending height is going to be 0. Then we have negative 16t squared, plus our velocity. We threw it at 20 feet per second, so 20t, plus our starting height. Our arm is starting at 5 feet, so right there. Oops, I made one mistake. Our ball should get over our fence, and the top of the fence right here is 12 feet. So we want it to end at least over 12 feet. So this is in our quadratic formula, except for that it's not equal to 0. So I'm just going to subtract 12 from both sides to make it equal to 0. So we have negative 16t squared plus 20t, and now we have a negative 7. Now, we could use the whole entire quadratic equation, or we can just use our discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, to figure out, does this cross our x-axis or the ground at 1 point, 2 points, or no points? Does it even touch the x-axis ever? So if we plug in what we know a right here is negative 16, b is 20, and c is negative 7. We will have 20 squared minus 4 times a times c. A is negative 16 and c is negative 7. So in your calculator, or some of you might know this, 20 squared or 20 times 20 is 400. I know a negative times a negative is going to make a positive. Times a negative again is also a negative. So 4 times 16 gives me 64. And then multiplied by 7 is 448. So right there, 400 minus 448 is going to be a negative 48. There's more negatives. So if I was to take the square root, you can't take the square root of a negative number, so there is no solution. This is never going to touch the x-axis, meaning it's never going to make it over the fence. So did the ball make it over the fence? Nope. Alright, your homework is simply 3 through 17 and 27 through 30 on page 681. If you happen to finish during work time, you can read, but prior to that, I would suggest that you finish any homework or all homework from chapter 10 and all other missing work. This is your last homework assignment for the year. We will take our test next time and work on our project following that on Monday or Tuesday.